Well, hi, everybody, and welcome. Diverse and inclusive library collections are very important and dear to my heart, so I do read widely to know and understand what's out there and what I want to recommend. So let's get started, because what in the world do we mean by diverse or by inclusive? And I've taken my definitions from ALA and given you the site where I got them. Diversity can be defined as the sum of the ways that people are both alike and different. When we recognize, value, and embrace diversity, we are recognizing, valuing, and embracing the uniqueness of each individual. Inclusion means an environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, are valued for their distinctive skills, experiences, and perspectives, have equal access to resources and opportunities, and contribute fully to the organization's success. The ALA interprets this as part of their Bill of Rights, and in the end, as much as they want to affirm equity, diversity, and inclusion, they also are embracing this in everything we do. In other words, diverse is when you have a lot of different things because you have different people. Let's just use it in books. You value what you see on the shelves and you'll find something that might mirror you or you want to find out more about. But inclusion makes these books feel like everyone could read them and enjoy them or feel that they've gotten something from them and get to know the characters even better as part of the human race, as part of their community. That's the difference. Diversion, it's out there, we see it, great, but inclusion means everyone feels part of it. I have 3 resources for you today, which you can download right from the screen. I have the criteria, which I'm going to go over for evaluating material, and it's my criteria. I have resources that I looked into, and this is what I've come up with. And I'll have examples from the book list that match the criteria. The book list has a few older titles, but mainly I'm looking at 2017 and 2018 titles. And the last handout is a resource list of where to look for the very best books, award-winning titles, and organizations that give awards to young people's literature. So when you want to enhance your collection with the very best literature, I've got links to where you will find titles written by and about Native Americans, First Nation people, by and about African Americans, maybe translated English from another language to English, so that everything is on there. Okay, so let's look at the criteria with examples from the book list. And by the way, more than one standard can and will fit most of these titles. The criteria helps you decide why you purchase specific titles and why you might read something or not. And I just want to, I assume that most of you purchase your material from reading reviews, noting maybe a major author's work, something published new, and you'll just always purchase that. I would really want you to think about where you read your reviews, because when you read a book, and let's say you notice it has maybe 2-star reviews and 1 that's not, after you've done this a while, double check back to the periodical that actually felt the most real for you from that book. So in other words, if you looked at The Journey of Little Charlie that got lots of great reviews by Christopher Paul Curtis, which review, when you read the book, feels like that's how you feel? And that's the periodical. If you do this more often, you'll start realizing that, oh, book list always seems to match me. Or SLJ, I look for certain people who review and I always go there. Or Horn Book, that's what I feel about. Because frankly, you cannot read everything out there about a book before you buy it. So my recommendation is to go to the periodical that really seems to fit you. Okay, here we go. Standard 1, the characters should be portrayed as individuals, not as representatives of a group. Characters should transcend stereotypes and represent universal characteristics that reflect the ways in which we are connected. Readers should be able to recognize characters through text and illustration. The first book that I feel does this is Amal Unbound, and I love this book. It's a contemporary story of a Pakistani girl who wants to become a teacher. She loves her teacher. She lives in a small, poor town, and most of the people in the town are indebted to the landlord who owns the land. They're, in a way, in Pakistan, we would call them sharecroppers. Her parents have, as poor as they are, have always been good about not having to borrow money from the landlord. And when they do, they can't pay it back on time. And so the landlord, who is quite a villainous character, takes Amal and makes her a servant in his house. And he has, a huge mansion, many, many servants who have all come there as indentured servants with really no hope of ever leaving. This is because the pet debts will not be paid. This is somewhat based on Malala Yousafzai's ambition to see girls educated. That is in the notes by the author, because Malala sees education for girls as the way out of something like this. And I think this book is very important. This is middle school level and great, great story. Love, Hate, and Other Filters is a YA book. And this is about American-born 17-year-old Maya Aziz, and she's an American girl, but her family is from South Asia, India. And she is a Muslim, and her parents want her to be raised like an Indian girl, and she's going to, like a Bollywood type of life. She wants to go to film school, and she wants to go to New York City, and they don't want any of this. It's a romance, but it's also a book about terrorism. And it's got two parts to it, and the terrorism part is actually quite frightening in that there is a terrorist bombing near her school in Illinois, and the law enforcement originally thinks that, not that she's involved, not at all, not that her family's involved, but the person they think who's done this, last name is Aziz, and people in her community and classmates start treating her very different, and she sees how people are filled with fear, bigotry, and hatred. And the third book on this page is Dear Rachel Maddow, which I thought this was going to be a lot sweeter than it was. I found this a really sad book. It's for high schoolers. Bryn Harper is really at the end of her rope. She's been taken out of and put into a special ed type of class. Not that she's having difficulties with her schoolwork if she would do it, it's that she just cannot concentrate and her life is a mess. And so her grades are fallen and she's stuck. So one of her assignments is she has to write a letter to someone and, detail something important to her. And she chooses to write to Rachel Maddow because she loves her. And then the book is an epistolary novel as she continues writing these emails that she doesn't send. And she tells the story of her girlfriend who they've just broken up, of her brother who died of an overdose, and an apathetic mother and an abusive stepfather. I'm not kidding you. It is really a sad book, but there is hope at the end. So that's important to know. If I Was Your Girl is a beautiful story by Meredith Russo about Amanda who's starting a new school, but she does have a secret. And as she makes new friends and starts assimilating into the school, she meets Grant, and she's very taken with him, but her secret is that she used to be called Andrew. Meredith Russo is transgender, and this book is really well written, and excellent choice. And the last one on this page, American Street by Ibi Zoboi, was so different. This got rave reviews, starred reviews everywhere, and I was really intrigued and wanted to read it, and I liked it, but it's so far from my life that it was very eye-opening. It's a contemporary story, and Fabiola Toussaint was born in the States, but her mother takes her back to Haiti in Port-au-Prince to raise her until she's of high school age, and they feel that she needs better education. She's a smart girl. They'd like to see only the best of her. But when they go through customs, the mother is stopped. And so Fabiola goes on to Detroit to live with her aunt and her 3 cousins who are, this is like something out of, that I would never know. It's a very gritty urban story, and Fabiola, as much as she's enjoying school and wants to learn and it's really good and even gets a new boyfriend, freedom has a cost. And what is the price for the American dream? Excellent book. All right, criterion number 2. Culture should be accurately portrayed. This may involve information to a particular text. Social issues and problems should be depicted frankly and accurately and without oversimplification. In other words, culture should entail more than the 4 F's: food, folklore, fashion, and festivals. Nowhere Boy by Catherine Marsh in middle school is 2 parallel stories. One of a Syrian boy from Aleppo fleeing war, and another of a white American boy, son of a NATO contractor, and they intersect in this house. And from the cover of the book, you see the boy in the 3rd floor and Ahmed in the basement. This is based on Catherine Marsh actually went to Brussels and lived in a house. She makes it exactly like her house. And she met somebody who knew about Anne Frank. And so this is where the hiding in the house comes from. And it's a beautiful story about these 2 boys. Max, the American boy, is having so much trouble assimilating in Brussels. He doesn't know French, his schooling, he just feels like a fish out of water. And Ahmed is a Syrian boy fleeing civil war in Aleppo, and he's by himself. This touches on refugees, immigrant integration, terrorism, Islam, Islamophobia, and the Syrian war. And it's done with such beauty and grace. Highly recommend it. The Night Diary. This is also middle school, and this is historical fiction. It takes place in 1947, which most Americans don't seem to know, or even kids don't really spend any time learning about this. But this is when India got its independence from the British Crown. However, the government of India, which was run by Congress Party and the Hindus, could not agree with the Muslims how to govern the country, so they decided to partition it, and that's where Pakistan and India were split. And Nisha's family is Hindu living in Pakistan, and they must move down to India because they can't stay there. And it's really quite a terrible journey for Nisha, and as she explains it in the letters she writes to her mother, who has passed away long ago, but it's like someone who she feels close to. It's very, very sad, and I was not that impressed with it, only because a real diary like Anne Frank's diary, this wasn't it. But I think middle school kids would really like this book. Okay. This is one of my favorites, What Elephants Know, probably because it's about a boy instead of always a lot of girls. I know not all these books are girls' books, you may have noticed already, but sometimes I worry about that. Anyway, What Elephants Know is really more about the 1970s Nepal. And it's written by Eric Dinerstein, who is an author scientist, and he lived there. He really knew this area. And it's about an orphan boy who was raised by a community that works for the king in taking care of elephants, and the elephants are used for tiger hunts for the royalty. And as time has gone on, they're not finding a lot of tigers, so the king is going to close down this sanctuary for elephants. And Nandu is afraid that where will he go? He's an orphan, and he won't be able to keep up with his schooling, and this is his family. So he has to come up with a solution on what will work. Now, the next book, Piecing Me Together by Renee Watson, just won so many awards this year. It was a Prins honor, a Newbery honor, a Coretta Scott King Award winner, and it is worth it. I love this book. It's a contemporary story of Portland, Oregon. And Jade believes that she must get out of her poor neighborhood if she's ever going to succeed. Her mother tells her to take advantage of every opportunity that comes her way, and she gets a scholarship to a private school where she feels pretty much like an outsider. But she figures there are so many opportunities. But some of the opportunities don't come her way, and she's pretty ticked off. And the one that she does get with a mentor who is also African-American for at-risk girls really infuriates her, until she comes to learn that she has to share in these opportunities. Just because she's poor and smart doesn't mean she gets to do everything. And the school finally really makes her realize, you got to share this. And she grows a lot in this story. And she is, you know, has a lot to share. And it's really well done. It really can be in for both middle schoolers and high schoolers. Renee Watson's first book, This Side of Home, was also about a neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, and another great book. Love her. Here's some nonfiction that will fit into this area. The first one is Albert Marin's Uprooted, the Japanese American experience during World War II. And I love this because it's a look at history of racism in America and Japan. And that's important to understand. This is really well thought out. You know, we always think about, you know, love FDR. Okay, maybe I love FDR, you know, but it was his decision and his racism that imprisoned U.S. citizens for no other reason except for race. Meanwhile, Japan is just as racist and xenophobic, so which led to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Really interesting and really well done. The next one is Susan Goldman Rubin. You can't go wrong with her. If you see her name, buy her books. This one is Brown versus Board of Education, and you might say, okay, everybody knows about that, and they do, but what makes her book different is she really explains the combination of cases involving several states and looking at the larger issue of racial inequality beyond just the schools. And the last one on this page is The Unwanted, Stories of Syrian Refugees. I probably would put it in your YA for high school, but I'm sure middle school kids will want it. It's wherever you put Don Brown's Drowned City, Hurricane Katrina, and New Orleans, this goes there too. This is graphic nonfiction. It's not fiction. And what he has done in portraying the Syrian refugees who must face the cunning smugglers, the unwelcoming neighbors, the hostile legislation, the refugees' own disenchantment, and their difficult conditions. It's really an amazing book, beautifully illustrated, and just, oh, I can't recommend it enough. Now, if you want something that's fiction, in graphic fiction, on the same subject, Ian Colfer and Andrew Donkin have just put out a book called Illegal, but that is fiction, this is nonfiction. Okay, number 3, setting should be authentic. The factual and historical details should be accurate. Select materials that reflect cultural complexities rather than reinforcing stereotypes. The first book is a fictionalized account called Refugee by Alan Gratz. Love Alan Gratz, love this book. And we hear a lot about today's refugees, but Alan Gratz actually reminds his readers of 3 different generations. We have a story that is about Nazi Germany from the 1930s, Cuba in 1994, and Syrian, today's world of Syrian refugees. It's a remarkable book. He also has just published, it's on the list, Grenade, which is about Okinawa. It's a historical fiction about an American soldier and an Okinawan boy who are going to meet. Edge of seat boys will love it. Okay, next is Eyes of the World, Robert Capa and Gerda Taro. The reason I chose this, sure, there's lots of biographies. Who ever heard of these people? Well, I never did, so it's interesting to find out. This was a couple that were both photographers, and they really changed how photojournalism really came of its own in the 1930s, especially during the Spanish Civil War, and how they had to go around the countries, especially from the Spanish Civil War, get the photos, and when they were put in magazines like Life and Look, they changed people's idea about what war was because they could then see it. It's an amazing story. And Undefeated by Steve Sheinkin. Okay, there's nothing I don't love that Steve Sheinkin has written. Nothing. Love, love, love him. This book encompasses the degradation of being in an Indian residential school, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where Jim Thorpe went to school. The beginning of football as played in college then and now. You can't imagine how violent it was, piling on, crashing into players, and how many plays, the offense and defense, the running game, very different than today, really is. And Thorpe's experiences in the Olympics. It's a fantastic story of sports athletes, and uncompromising hard work. And here's some more nonfiction. The 57 Bus. This will keep you on the edge of your seats. It's incredible. Dashka Slater is a New York Times magazine writer, and this was a case that she wrote up for the magazine and then turned it into a book. Sasha is a white teen, and she lived in the middle-class foothills and attended private school in Oakland, California. Richard, a black teen, lived in the crime-plagued flatlands of Oakland, and he went to a large public school. They were on the bus together, probably almost every day, for a mere 8 minutes. But one afternoon on the bus ride home, a single reckless act left Sasha severely burned and Richard charged with 2 hate crimes and facing life imprisonment. I'm telling you, it's really worth a read, and you've got to get kids to look at this. It's really great. This summer, The Sun Does Shine came out. It's an adult book. It was an Oprah pick for this summer. Nonfiction by Anthony Ray Hinton. I'm telling you, I couldn't put it down. It's very moving, about a man who spent over 30 years on death row in Alabama, and he was innocent. And the person who got him off is the next book, Brian Stevenson, who started the Equal Justice Initiative, and a man, I don't know, he's an amazing man. He's won a MacArthur grant. He's started the Lynching Museum, but he writes about how injustice has affected our lives, and especially Black lives. You can't read one without the other. He just came out, I'm talking 2 weeks ago, with Just Mercy, adapted for young adults. I'm telling you, kids will read it and they will love it. Please include them in your collections. All right, mirrors and windows are important for an inclusive collection. Books and media where students can see themselves reflected, as well as where they can learn about others. Okay, and the expression mirrors and windows is from Rudine Sims Bishop. I'm gonna just talk this. I'm not gonna say it, I'll read the whole thing, but books are sometimes windows offering views of the world that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. Some of them are even like sliding glass doors. You just have to walk through it. And I think this is such an important thought of mirrors and windows, how you can look through it and how it reflects back at you. So here are some that do just that. Freedom Over Me is based on real slave documents that Ashley Bryant had bought. He bought them and found out you could see the people, slave number 1, a cook, slave number 2, seamstress. And so he devised a way of making them come alive. What was their life like as a slave? And what would their life have been like if they could be anything they wanted? And you see the humanity of these people. It's a great, great book. And the way to really incorporate that into book talk is just read about one person and have the kids think about it. The second one here is Amina's Voice. Oh, both of these would be like middle school. And this is about a young Pakistani girl. She's an immigrant with her family, but she's starting to feel as if maybe she's losing some of that Pakistani feeling. She goes to her mosque, she's making friends, but maybe she's not quite as Pakistani as she used to be. She's losing some of this to be an American. And she has to see what some things you get to change, some things you don't, because really, all in all, it's still you. And for high schoolers, Nicola Yoon's The Sun Is Also a Star. Natasha is a girl who believes in science and facts, not fate, not destiny, or dreams that will never come true. She is not the kind of girl who meets a cute boy on a crowded New York City street and falls in love with him. Not when her family only has 12 hours left before they're going to be deported to Jamaica. And Daniel is a Korean American. His family's first generation. He's the good son, the good student, living up to his parents' expectations. He's not supposed to be a poet. They want him in pre-law, pre-med. And somehow the two of them connect. That's a connection that is magical. Criterion number 5. The collection should build understanding and respect for each child's cultural group identities, as well as respect for and tolerance of cultural differences, including differences of gender, language, race, ethnicity, religion, region, and disabilities. All's Fair in Middle School is a graphic novel. And I think that you might overlook something like this, although I'm sure you probably all bought this because it's Victoria Jameson, and anybody who loves Raina Telgemeier is going to love this book. But what it really is about is a family who makes their living working at a Renaissance fair, so they don't have a lot of money. And they're not really mainstream. And certainly the main character is not, because she's been homeschooled and she's finally going to go to middle school. Boy, bad choice on her part. But so you can see that, she's really scared about being bullied, making friends. She chooses the wrong kids. She doesn't know really how to be on the in crowd that she wants. It's about siblings, family, and actually a nice girl, nice family that has to learn how to stand up for herself and really make good decisions. Highly recommend it. The next one is Schomburg, The Man Who Built a Library. Both of these books are middle school, and I just really love this one because it's about a man during the Harlem Renaissance, Arturo Schomburg, who was an Afro-Puerto Rican who was a law clerk, and his passion was collecting books, letters, music, and art from Africa. This is what he did. And his collection grew and grew. He had to get different apartments. And finally, there was just no way he could ever house this. So he contacted the New York Public Library, where he created and curated a collection that was the cornerstone of a new Negro division. And the picture on the right is this is the Schomburg Center today. You can go there and study. It's an amazing place, and it's an amazing collection. Also, Kimberly Brubaker Bradley's The War That Saved My Life, and the sequel, The War I Finally Won. I think boys would even like Ada. And she is a girl with a club foot. And in the first book, which is during World War II in Britain, she and her brother are moved to the country to get out of London from the bombing. And she's had a hard life, and it's very hard for her to trust anybody. In The War I Finally Won, she has actually had surgery to fix her foot, but she's not really grateful at all. And she's a strong female protagonist with a lot to say about survival and learning empathy. I think that's, important themes for everybody. So highly recommend. And Front Desk, I just finished this yesterday, to be honest. I loved it. It's gotten great reviews, great reviews. This is a little girl, Mia, who talks about, to be honest, her own life in coming to this country from China with her mother and father. And the new immigrant experiences, the 1980s and 90s, how hard it was from poverty, assault, racism, and bullying. But she doesn't really come down hard on this. This is actually quite a funny book, as she and her parents run a motel for a rather nasty landlord. He owns many hotels, and he's very, very rich. And of course, he gets rich on immigrants' backs. And how Mia herself is learning how to write English and speak English. And in that process, she writes letters, thank you letters to patrons who tip her or leave something for her. Really nice letters, and also a letter to help everyone at the motel. Love this book. You are most likely to have older, even classic titles that have outdated and hurtful stereotypes. It is time to update and include other books that provide more accurate depictions of the same groups or cultures. Little House on the Prairie with Birchbark House, and pair them together for two different viewpoints of the same period. Now, I didn't put in other pictures, but I did want to mention that a brand new book by Ibi Zoboi, who wrote American Street, just came out called Pride. And that would be a great team up with Pride and Prejudice, which is classic no matter what. And in YA, there are so many different versions of Pride and Prejudice. But this latest one by Ibi Zoboi takes place in Brooklyn. And it's actually about the two families, Darcy and Elizabeth, but she's not called Elizabeth in this, is really interesting in that there's a lot of gentrification, which I guess is happening in Brooklyn, and not everybody can afford to live where they used to live. So it's great. So that would be two that also you could put them together: classic, older titles, and something new and updated. I have not read Pride, but it looked good from when I was skimming through it and reading a couple pages here and there, and I like the writing very much. Okay, 7. As you review your collection and continue to build, keep in mind that books and media with characters of color should not always be primarily about race or prejudice. Be aware that books featuring Black characters are not all about slavery. Books with Latino characters should focus on topics other than immigration. And this is a great place to use the resource list. What has won for a certain group of that you want to make sure you've got like the best book, and that these organizations that are listed in that resource list are actually looking for real, authentic stories about those cultures. But in that theme, I have an older book, The Misadventures of the Family Fletcher. For any of you who have missed this book, honestly, it's just sweet. 4 boys and 2 dads, all adopted, and they're all different, varying backgrounds. They all have dissimilar personalities. School presents challenges, grumpy neighbor, and there's sequels to the Family Fletcher family. Oh, that's silly. God, I can't believe I just said that. But there's sequels to this, and they're wonderful. So I wanted to make sure you did check that out. And Jason Reynolds' series, Ghost. Ghost is the name of a character. He goes by the name Ghost. He was actually Castle Cranshaw, and he loves to run. Well, sometimes you wouldn't say he actually loves to run, but boy, can he run, because he's had to run, especially when he was a ski and his mother were escaping their apartment when their father had a loaded gun and was aiming to kill them. Ghost has a lot of issues, and running away from them is something he likes to do, until he meets Coach, an ex-Olympic medalist who sees something in Ghost like crazy natural talent. And his mother is very happy about this, but it's like, there are things that comes before running and before the team, and you're going to have to do them. I think it's a book that was really loved when it came out, and it still is, because there's consequences. And I think kids need to see there are consequences for your decisions. In the same, they don't really call it a trilogy, but a series, in the same series, the next book was called Patina, and that was about a girl, Patsy. And the newest one just released is Sunny, and that's about a guy. And I wasn't that thrilled with Sunny. I'll be honest, I didn't finish it. But everybody who loves Ghost is probably going to love the other 2. And I did notice that it got starred reviews. So there you go. Don't listen to me on that. All right, now these books. A Tux by Philip Hoos is just being published in October, but I got an arc a while ago. It's called A Tux, after the Crispus Attucks High School in Indianapolis, and Oscar Robertson and the basketball team that awakened a city. Now, we all know that, of course, we're not segregation. We didn't have Jim Crow laws. Indianapolis is in the north. Oh, phooey. To be quite honest, the way when they had the great migration of blacks coming up from the south, the city laws segregated blacks, so they were all in one part of town, and they didn't say, oh, this school is segregated, but it only had blacks and black teachers. Now, the Crispus Attucks Tiger went down in history as the first team championships from Indianapolis, and the first all-black team in U.S. history to win a racially open championship tournament. And it wasn't easy. Not the basketball part, which was hard, but the point was they weren't even allowed in the same league as the other Indianapolis schools. And as their coach got them better trained and better, and they continued to win, other schools were just as happy in the rural parts of Indiana to get them to come. And people from all over the state would go wherever they played to watch them. They were so good. And so eventually they were allowed to play, and they finally won the Indianapolis tournament. For another look on this whole thing, you can go see the movie Hoosiers, which is an old movie from the 70s, but that's the story of Indiana basketball. Now, there's another book about basketball that I loved just a little bit more than the Philip Hoose book, called Strong Inside. There was an adult edition, and this one is the young readers edition. And this is how college basketball broke the color line through Perry Wallace. And it's kind of complicated, but Perry Wallace lived in Nashville. He grew up there. He went to a charter school. He was really a good student, and he was a great basketball player. And he was recruited around the country. He went and visited schools in the North, and he kind of found out that it seemed like the kids were just as segregated as they were in the South. So why not go for a full scholarship to Vanderbilt University in Nashville? Except they played in the SEC conference, which was all white in the South. And the school was totally unprepared to support him. I mean, it wasn't as if any of his teammates weren't happy to have him, but they didn't know how to act towards a black man. They didn't know how to support him when he was getting spit on the court and called all kinds of names from the stands. They didn't know when he went up and applied to be in a fraternity and he never got in. Wonder why? Well, there was no segregation. They didn't say he couldn't apply, but he never got in. It ended up in his senior year, he became the class president. He was well liked, but he was also very vocal about how Vanderbilt had treated him, and they changed a lot of things because he was vocal in a way that got things done. I think it's an important story. And the last book you're looking at is Nevertheless, We Persisted. And I want to tell you that this book is great, but nobody will take it out if you don't talk about it. It is filled with 48 stories of, and it says on the cover, defiance, strength, and courage. There is a 90-plus-year-old Holocaust survivor. There is a young man who tries to get elected into the city council. You don't have to read all these 48 stories. Pick and choose. Pick what you want. As you can see from the cover, it's not all, it's everybody. It's the world. It's the United States. It's all different kinds of people, women, men, black, brown, white, biracial. It's amazing stories. And I just think that these stories, read short ones and tell kids about them and let them know. You don't have to read the whole book, but these stories are inspiring. I was inspired. I only read a couple of them. Okay. Look for books where non-white characters solve their problems without intervention from whites. Make sure that you have many books with non-white main characters and that they are depicted on the cover of the books. Sidekicks are fine and usually fun, but be aware of the race of the sidekicks to main characters that are not of the same race. Your collection should reflect that these characters are equals. And I have to tell you, I love The Parker Inheritance. This is middle school level by Varian Johnson. And this is, you know, the main characters, the best friends. This is it. This is what we're talking about. A Westing Game inspired tale is a historical mystery, a satisfying multi-generational family story, and an exploration of 20th century and contemporary race and racism. And by the way, I'm sure you all have an old copy of the Westing Game. Stick it next to the Parker Inheritance because kids of today have probably not looked at it. You have probably, half of you are young, you've never read it. It really needs to go with this because the author himself, Varian Johnson, said he loved the Westing Game. And my husband who read this book said, you know, I think he really would have enjoyed it even more if he'd known about the Westing Game. There are well-placed clues that keep the history and race relations at the front of readers' mind, which provides the key to solving the mystery. And this is partly 20th century, Jim Crow era, into today's world about race and racism in a town. I highly recommend this. Okay, The Hate You Give. This book emphasizes the need to speak up about injustice. That's a message that will resonate with all young people concerned with fairness, and Star's experience will speak to readers who know Star's life like their own and provide perspective for others. Star tells it like it is. She's very vocal. and I think it's an important book. Also, The Hate You Give, the letters Thug, comes from Tupac Shakur's poetry, and The Rose and the, I didn't write it down. Anyway, I actually read his poetry, which I was very impressed with, and, you know, put that also with The Hate You Give. I think kids will want to know what gave Angie Thomas that title. And on this page, the last one is All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Keeley. It's a tour de force, that's what I consider it, that shares the alternating perspectives of Rashad and Quinn as the complications from a single violent moment. It's taken right out of the headlines of today, and it's all from a bag of chips. Highly, highly recommend all three of these books. 2 nonfiction books. Americanized, Rebel Without a Green Card. This family, and Sarah Saidi, this is a memoir of her life, came after the Iranian Revolution. So we're talking 78, sometime after that. They had to get out of that country. And it is funny. She's an illegal immigrant, and she does give us, you know, the PC word that you should use for that. She doesn't know that, of course. She was a little girl when they came here, and too little to know anything about this, until she starts getting old enough to want a job, and her older sister tells her, well, you can't, because you don't have a social security card, because we're illegal, which frightens her to death. But it is true, they are illegal, and they could be deported at any time. And to be honest, reading this book and understanding, it gives you a real understanding of what people who are paying taxes, following every law, being good citizens, and desperately wanting to go right through and do the right thing, but paperwork and years go by before they can do the right thing. Sarah Saidi is an American citizen now, as is her family. It's a wonderful story and very funny. Highly recommend it. And Sachiko is a story that I recommend for a different reason. This little girl, and this is a picture of her before we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And most of her family was wiped out, but not all. And she has grown up in Japan with most people in the rest of Japan not knowing that an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For years, no one talked about it. It wasn't even in their history books. And finally, as an adult, she does break free and starts telling people about it, which it's hard to believe that they didn't believe her. But some of that history was just wiped out. Now, part of it was the shame of the Japanese. And but when she does talk about it, it's the only way, if we talk about it, is how we're going to solve some of the issues we have today. So I think it's a great book, very important. Okay, story and plot should be more than a vehicle, to express some truth about a culture or experience. Remember that those characteristics that make a book memorable, whether it is a journey or quest, fiction or nonfiction, is where the child places herself or himself in those pages. Flying Lessons and Other Stories, short story collection. If you notice at the very bottom of this, you'll see edited by Ellen O, co-founder of We Need Diverse Books. And all of the authors of these short stories are diverse authors, all given backgrounds. And they reflect the personal challenges and growth in the stories without emphasizing the diverse aspect of each character, but rather the commonality. The first story is by Matt de la Peña, and it's about friendship and father-son relationships, but the main character just happens to be Mexican. And again, when I see short stories and I want to talk about them, I say, you don't read the whole book. You look for an author you like, you look to see which one's the shortest if that's what you want, or you just find something started. So that's how you sell this, as far as I'm concerned. Long Way Down is a very short book by Jason Reynolds. And Will, age 15, is ready to avenge his brother's death with a gun hidden in their shared room, and Will knows it's there. On the ride down in the elevator, as he's going out to do this avenging act, Each floor brings a new passenger from his past, a past filled with death and revenge. Obviously, it's very powerful, and the revelations are amazing. And it is such a fast read. Every one of you should read this, just so you know. And there is a movie coming out, but I'm going to talk about movies in a second. And the last one just came out, Jacqueline Woodson's Harbor Me. Got fabulous reviews. Well, I don't think it's her best book, but I think it's very timely. 6 kids discover the power of sharing secrets with each other when they're allowed to spend an hour each week in an open classroom without any teacher at the end of the day. The story celebrates the power of friendship and empathy. The kids are dealing with deportation, racial profiling, and a sense of belonging. And this should be paired with a really older book, the olden days of the 1990s, when it won a Newbery, E.L. Konigsberg's The View from Saturday. That's another one from the, number 6, put pairing books together. Got a modern book and an older book. And The View from Saturday is not like Harbor Me, but there's 4 kids who have different situations that all come together to win a Jeopardy type quiz. And it works. Harbor Me works too. I think that there's sensitive characterizations, touching situations, and the kids really bond with each other. And so I think I know it's an important book. No. All right, The Poet X. Elizabeth Acevedo. I heard her recite her poetry, and I heard her, recite poetry from this book. She's amazing, and she looks just like how she describes Ziamara, a rather short young woman, big bushy hair, and she does, talk about that. She kind of picks her like that, and she's came into puberty way too early and had to deal with, upper elementary and middle school with her breasts growing huge, her body changing so fast, and she does all of this in verse. She is a twin, so it's Ziamara and her twin brother Xavier, and the great, great poetry of rhythmic, and it's really because of doing and learning about poetry slams. And her English teacher, and I guess this is all true to her, but this is fiction, could tell she could write poetry, and it was learning how to write what she wanted to say in the poetry, in the rhythm, and performing for poetry slams. It's amazing. However, the major part of the story is the fact that her mother does not trust her at all. Doesn't trust her because she's a girl. Everything bad's going to happen to her. If you're a woman, you know all the bad things that could happen to you. But yet her boy twin is never questioned. And so she and her mother must learn to communicate and trust. And I just love the way this story went, the trajectory of the story and how they learned to do it. I thought it was very real. I really highly recommend it. And because it's in verse, it doesn't take long to read. The First Rule of Punk by Celia Perez. Maria Luisa, and she calls herself Malu, and her parents do too, must move with her mother from Florida to Chicago. Her mother's a professor, and she's gotten a fellowship to teach at the University of Chicago. Her parents are divorced, and her father's a little strange, has one of those out there record shops, and she really feels close to him, but she's going to go with her mother. And she feels like, everything she loves is back in Florida, starting a new school, and she's feeling that her mother does not understand her at all. And she really is a quite unique girl. She makes her own zines, and they're in the book, really good. I don't mean that as a zine they're good, but it's great to break this up as you can see her evolution in her year, his first year in Chicago. And she loves old punk music. I have no idea what punk music is. I don't know where it comes from. I don't get it, but I enjoyed this book. And it's about being true to yourself. I highly recommend The First Rule of Punk to anybody who just wants to be themselves. And lastly is a nonfiction book called The Girl Who Drew Butterflies, How Maria Marion's Art Changed Science. Joyce Sidman, who we know for her beautiful poetry and her scientific knowledge with using her poetry over the years, has written about a woman from the 17th century, okay, that's the 1600s, who was studying insects up until the time where Maria Marion was drawing and painting these insects and paying attention to what happened to them, most people thought at the time that it was spontaneous generation. They just appeared. So a butterfly was a butterfly because there it is, it's a butterfly. No one studied that it was a caterpillar, then the pupa into the butterfly. And she made paintings and drawings of all of this, every insect she could. This is what she did with her time. She also was a typical woman of the time. It wasn't like she was living off by herself. She was married twice. Both husbands were in the publishing field, and so her art was preserved in published books. She outlived them and ended up in the later part of her life traveling by boat, think of the boats then, to Suriname, which was a Dutch colony on the equator. Can you imagine the heat and the dresses she was wearing? And she and her eldest daughter were out there in the jungle painting and getting samples. It was amazing. Okay, my timer just went off, so no time, and yeah, I don't have any time. But what I want to say is, if you don't have time, that's what this resource list is all about. So check out the resource list. You'll see the awards. There's a TED Talk listed. It's really worth the time. Supplemental reading. And the last thing I want to mention is on the back of the book, on the bottom of the book list, are Native American titles and authors. And I don't have anything except Steve Sheinkin's book about Jim Thorpe on this list. I have some titles here. To be honest, the only one I know is Sherman Alexie's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And he is not in favor right now. I have tried to read Eric Gainsworth, and he's well reviewed. I haven't really liked him, but he has a brand new one out this year, Give Me Some Truth. Cynthia Lettich Smith has got Hearts Unbroken, which is coming out right around now. And last year's winner for a graphic novel, and which was won the Native American Prize, Tales of the Mighty Code Talkers, Volume 1. Nobody in Upper Hudson locally has it, and it's $20 from Amazon. So without seeing it, I'm not sure I would purchase it because I don't know if kids would take it out. We have other books on code talkers. That's the kind of decisions you have to make. And last, make sure you check out the movies. We've got Dumpling coming by Julie Murphy, Long Way Down. Love, Simon's already come out this year, which is that Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. The Hate You Give, which is getting, big play. The Miseducation of Cameron Post, which also recently came out. And of course, the Netflix To All the Boys I've Loved, which got great reviews, and part of a Jenny Han's trilogy. Okay, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes to get their questions in. I also just wanted to point out all of the things that Joyce was talking about, the reference list and the book list and all of that stuff can be found in this handouts tab on your sidebar. I'll also send a follow-up email with the link to this archive and those as PDF attachments. So we'll give everyone just a couple more minutes. If they have any questions or have any comments for Joyce, please let us know. And while we're waiting, Joyce, if there's anything you missed, if you want to go back, go for it.
There was 53 books on the book list, and 14 I didn't include in here, but I still highly recommend them all. I was reading till my eyes were going to fall out, and I wanted to thank Sue Rokos because she got a lot of ARCs this year, and so I got some of these things before they were published so I could talk about them, because that is so hard when you're trying to have an up-to-date collection. You see starred reviews, or you don't see reviews, and you hear, you're just hearing about all of this at one time. So that's why it's great to read reviews, because then you really are on top of what's going, if you can.
Okay, and we have a question. Could you talk a little bit about people of color supporting characters with a white main character and how we can judge those books for positive representation?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure if we always can. When there's a sidekick, I guess what you really want to see is, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about, is, they have the friend. You want to see that they also have a characterization that feels true, and also that they have a decent part in the play, if you want to call it that. Think about it, the play. You know, the person comes in, they go out. Have they contributed to the story, or are they just there and just got stuck in it? And that's maybe something that, if you look at some of the older books, and I honestly cannot think of one title that way, but you might say, you know, I don't really like that. I don't think that's a good thing. So that's my judgment. And then you even go back and look at old reviews and say, did anybody even notice this? Is the book that good that you don't care? And maybe that's true, you don't. But I do think that those side characters sometimes need to be changed, and that's why you know, they can be a lot of fun, but make sure that they do have a good part to play. Hope that helped.
If we don't have any other questions, we can wrap it up for the afternoon. I want to say thank you to Joyce again. I also want to thank YSS for sponsoring this webinar, and we'll let everybody go a little bit early.
Okay, and also, you know, you can email me if you have any other questions, so don't hesitate. Or if you have a comment or a book that you think I ought to know about, you can do that too. So thank you.
Thank you, Joyce.